The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Good afternoon, good day, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Reverend Kelvin Sauls. We're coming to you live from Morris Media Studios right here in Leimert Park, South Los Angeles, in the United States of America. It is a beautiful and sunny day here in Los Angeles, and we are so glad that you're able to join us for, once again, Faith Without Borders. As always, here at Faith Without Borders, we seek to be a progressive platform for thought-provoking and solutions-driven dialogue to inform and inspire, mobilize, and organize liberatory work which leads us to racial equity. And we seek to do that for what's happening in the United States, but also around the world. And so we're glad that you're joining us. Today we have a sister, friend, and leader with us who will be joining us from Clearwater, Florida, via Skype. But before we bring Denise on, if you didn't know this, I was born and raised in South Africa, right there in South Johannesburg. And today is National Women's Day in South Africa, so we want to just pause for a moment and just celebrate and honor all women in South Africa during this time, those who've gone before us, on whose shoulders we stand. And we can name so many of them. Miriam Makeba. We can name so many of them. Brenda Fassie. We can name so many of them who has gone before us. We're standing on their shoulders. We are grateful for the work that they've done, especially moving South Africa towards freedom and liberation. I want to lift up my mother, Annie Sauls. We stand on her shoulders. And so there are so many ways that we can honor our women in South Africa, and also women in general, whether it's here in Los Angeles or around the world, just for the liberatory work that women always engage in. And in honoring our women from South Africa, we would want to certainly lift up two phrases that we know that are well associated, with the work that women have done in South Africa to celebrate liberation and to move us towards that. One certainly is well known around the world, which is, if you strike a woman, you've struck a rock. That phrase came out of the Women's March that we have over 50 years ago in South Africa, that march for freedom, that march for liberation. The other phrase I want to lift up, one that we are very familiar with, but many, many times we're not aware of the fact that actually it was the women in South Africa who birthed this particular phrase. We've heard it, quoted by President Barack Obama. We've also heard it quoted by one of my favorite groups, Sweet Honey in the Rock. They wrote a song around it after they heard the story during a visit in South Africa. That phrase is, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." Women in South Africa, when all the leaders were jailed by the apartheid regime, as they were discerning the direction and what to do, they realized that while leaders were in jail, most of the men, that they just not going to sit around and wait until they come out. Hence the phrase, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." So we celebrate that, and grateful for Sweet Honey and Rock for introducing us to that term through a song that they arranged around that. And then, of course, President Barack Obama picking that up and using it in one of his speeches around that. So we celebrate certainly women in South Africa and women here in Los Angeles, around the United States, and the world for the work that they have done. We want to just note that tonight there will be a celebration here in Los Angeles, a powerful concert that will take place with two phenomenal jazz artists from South Africa who will be at the Ford Theater here in Hollywood. Sia Makuzeni is going to be there, and Tandi Ntuli. That's going to be tonight at 8 p.m. At the Ford. We invite you to, check out the website of the Ford Theater Hollywood if you want to. If you don't have anything to do tonight, come on out, join us. It's going to be a great concert. We spent some time with them yesterday and Friday as we've celebrated, Women's Day this whole weekend right here in Los Angeles. So, to all of our women out there, thanks for who you are, for what you do, and you continue to be an inspiration to us as we continue to work together, towards freedom and liberation for all. Now, speaking of women, one such a woman that we have with us today certainly is one that's on the forefront in so many ways around what's happening in Puerto Rico right now, and that is dear sister friend, as well as a colleague on the front lines. Denise Collazo. She currently serves as the senior advisor for external affairs at Faith in Action, which is a multi-religious and a multiracial faith-based organizing movement, if you will, across the United States and indeed the world. I've had the privilege of being associated with this organization or an affiliate of it in San Francisco. In 1996, we started our work together, Denise and I, while I was associate pastor at Jones Memorial United Methodist Church. So shout out to the folk at Jones in Los Angeles, the Western Addition, formerly known as the Fillmore District. Gentrification, had to change that name. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. But we have Denise here, and I'm just appreciative of her and the work that she continues to do now on a national level. She is in Florida, Clearwater. She's joining us via Skype. Denise, are you there? Welcome to Faith Without Borders. So good to have you with us.
Yes, Reverend Sauls, it's great to be here with you. It's so good to see your face and hear your voice, and I'm so grateful. You said 1996. That's telling a little of our age here, but we've been working and fighting together and showing love out in the world for a long time together. So it's wonderful to be here with you, and I'm grateful for those of you who are watching via Facebook Live and other channels. So Thank you for having me.
Yes, so thanks. We're not going to go to age. When we met, I had hair. I have no hair now, so that at least should tell you something about it. But, we in Los Angeles, so here in Los Angeles, we try to update ourselves at least every 18 months because there are so many plastic surgeons around here, so we can, I can go to my barbershop here in LA and just get updated,
That's
so
right.
so we're trying to keep up with that. But hey, it's been a long haul, and you've been in it. You continue to be in it. And today, certainly, we want to talk about Puerto Rico. That is, your place of origin, where your people are, and so we want to just today do some intersectional conversation around what's been going on in Puerto Rico, and so looking forward to that. But before we get there, I know you and Reverend Herring, who is the executive director of Faith in Action, we've been experiencing a lot of traumatic happenings in this yet to be United States of America. Aside from the destruction and devastation, in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, we certainly want to lift up those who've been affected by the gun violence there, and through that, we just don't want to pray for them, but we continue to deepen our partnership around ending gun violence, looking for ways to reduce it, and so for reduction and intervention. And we do that with so many different partners, around the country. And so, but on that day that Trump went to El Paso and Dayton to facilitate comfort on behalf of the country to those folk, and in my opinion, he failed miserably in that. But insult to injury came because of a raid by ICE that took place in Mississippi. That just caused so much devastation. I read your post on Facebook around the words of Anne Frank. That was just so powerful around that. You and Reverend Herring just got back from Mississippi to go and see about our people there. Those who've been affected by this, the children, the men, the women, the families, and that community certainly experiencing trauma and terror that continue to be unleashed by this administration. Do you want to just give us, just some perspective around this, how are people there, and what are the conditions, and especially the children, who on the first day of school got home and parents weren't there, some weren't picked up from school, because of that. Can you just give us a quick update and some perspective on that, Denise?
Sure, yes. So Reverend Herring, who's our National Executive Director, and I happened to be in Tunica, Mississippi over the weekend, and it just became very clear that we needed to lean in. Mm-hmm. One thing I've learned over the years through community organizing is, as people were generally trained to lean back when there's discomfort or we freeze, as community organizers, we have learned that the best thing to do is to lean into the pain, lean into the discomfort. So we got a car, hopped in it, and drove down to the Jackson, Mississippi area. And what we found was deeply, deeply disturbing and troubling. I looked into the faces of very young moms, nursing moms, babies, being comforted by moms, dads who are kind of walking around in a daze. And the children, the number one concern that people are expressing right now is that they need food. Mm-hmm. So this is an example of the people who are doing the hardest work with the least resources is being targeted. And, if a parent gets deported in that kind of precarious financial situation, there's no room for recovery. That family will be permanently changed. Mm-hmm. 680 people were arrested at work at a chicken processing factory. So if that's probably the hardest and worst work a person could do. And the children, one of our partners, we rolled up in front of a United Methodist church, and I'm so grateful for the church in general, but also labor unions, the local partners like MEDA and Southeast Immigrant Rights Network, United Food and Commercial Workers. A lot of people are there in response. I think our approach was, we want to be a racial solidarity organization. So Reverend Herring and I showed up. Our goal was to take our faith and put it into action, to take our love and put it into action, and to make it clear to the people who are there handing out food and giving out baby formula and comforting little children, 4-year-old girl who was continually crying about, where's my daddy, where's my daddy? And, what's the answer? We wanted to make sure they understood that they are not alone and that we are there with them, the 3,000 congregations that are part of our organization, plus all the denominations that we partner with. We're here. We're going to respond. This is unacceptable. It's happening on our watch. We are in some ways complicit if we don't speak out and do something to make this different. And, our organization has been working on it a lot. I personally, over the last period of years, have been, just responding. But I feel like what people don't see on the news or what people don't hear is what the impact is. It's really easy for people to talk about, they start to talk about rules. And what I talk about is, okay, well, now that this has happened, we need baby formula, diapers size 1 through 6. We need school supplies. We need rice and whole beans sent to Mississippi, Canton, Mississippi, and we need it now. And that's a very different picture of what you're seeing on the news or the way people sometimes talk about what this is about. And really, if you think about it, many of us have been declared to be unlawful or illegal. The tax collector Zacchaeus, I'm sure he was doing some white-collar crime. You have Rahab the prostitute. You got Jesus, who was punished by the state. He was made the work he was doing was made unacceptable. So we're here. We showed up. Our organization is going to continue to respond, and we're trying to learn how we can make the change that needs to be made so this does not ever happen. This is only what we saw in Mississippi is the beginning of what's going to continue to happen in states across the country unless we stop it.
Yeah. Certainly, I mean, your words around the importance of leaning in, and as people of faith, how to put our faith into action and how to live out our love. Both faith and love are verbs and not nouns. So in our faith, that's certainly a call to action. And so glad that you guys were able to be there to lean in on our behalf. We're going to try and see before the end of the show if we can get the phone number of that United Methodist Church in Canton so that folk can maybe call and see how they can get some of those supplies, in there. That's just so important for us. Also, you mentioned that, this is what was publicized, right? This is what got on the news. A lot of these raids and families being separated, that it doesn't make the news. And I have to say that especially, when it happens to black immigrants, they are a group that continues to be marginalized and pushed into invisibility. And so consequently, a lot of these aspects that face black immigrants are not being discussed. And so we want to just make a program note, that next week, on August the 25th, our conversation will be around black immigrants, especially blacks on the southern border of the U.S. And we're going to have some guests here who will be talking to us about that as we seek to lean into that particular conversation and that particular issue that affects so many people on the border. But thanks, your presence certainly there I know was not just comforting, but also communicated a deep sense of compassion, with our sisters and brothers there. And so we'll continue to see how we can organize and mobilize and inspire folk to extend ourselves to the folk in Mississippi and elsewhere where these raids are happening. I'm reminded of a tweet that was put out by Senator Claire McCaskill from Kansas, and her message was actually a question, what happened to the owners of that chicken processing plant?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, were they arrested? Were they interrogated? Any, around this? No. So that shows us the bias, with which ICE and this administration, that they apply to this, issue around what happens, to immigrants and just that exploitative economic aspect that is part of this. But more about that, next week, and we'll as we continue to, here at Faith Without Borders, see how we can apply our faith regardless of borders, because we believe we serve a God without borders, and so we celebrate that.
Let me just add one thing about I would shout out my partner in the movement, Jonathan from Undocu Black, who is doing some really amazing work, and would be great for you to connect up with, because he's part of our movement, and he's leading in this space of Black immigrants, and so thanks for featuring that.
Absolutely. Well, if you hook us up with Jonathan, and we'll certainly make sure that we get him to bring some perspective. That's what this is all about, to try and see how we can inform and inspire. We want to get to Puerto Rico. We know that you just got back from that. I have when I was in seminary at United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. I had the opportunity to be a campus pastor, part of the campus ministry team at the University of Dayton, and it was there that I got connected to Puerto Rico because of the students that we had there from Puerto Rico, and one that just jumps out at me is Jose, who we just connected and hooked up and became friends, comrades. In fact, when I organized our first, spring breakout experience, which was experience we had there, I organized one to Haiti, and Jose was one who signed up for that, and we've been, connected, ever since. And so that was my introduction, to Puerto Rico, and just understanding, the ongoing, occupational tentacles of the United States, into the Caribbean, whether it's the U.S. Virgin Islands or whether it is, Puerto Rico. So we want to talk a little bit about, your experience there, but I thought we'd start with, just you kind of telling us a little bit about, just a brief historical overview of Puerto Rico. We do not want to fall into the trap of ignorance that Trump has bought, clearly property there, that county, that city, and that town called ignorance. We don't want to fall victim to that. We'll leave him to occupy that. But just to let folk know a little bit, just some brief history around, Puerto Rico, just to put into perspective, for us, because that's going to be critical as we talk about solutions, around moving forward. So would you just give us, a brief, historical overview of Puerto Rico?
Sure, I'll do a thumbnail sketch. The island was originally inhabited by Arawak Indians, Arawak Native Indigenous people, and many people call them the Taino Indians. The truth is, the name for the island was called Boriquen, which means land of the noble lords. And the first word that they said to the Spanish settlers when the settlers arrived was Taino, which means peace. Puerto Rico has over time been a combination. Being a Puerto Rican means that you're Spanish, Arawak, and African. So that's what the mix of Puerto Rico is. Once the Spanish came, they colonized and brutalized the native people. Slavery was imposed, and eventually in 1898, Puerto Rico was won from Spain. The U.S. now owns Puerto Rico. And in the early part of the 1900s, we were given U.S. citizenship. Part of the reason was because they needed fighters for World War I. Fast forward to now, there's a lot more to say, but fast forward to now, Puerto Rico, everyone who is born in Puerto Rico is a U.S. citizen. But in many ways, we're like Washington, D.C., where you have you are a U.S. citizen, but you cannot vote on issues at the federal level. So we don't have congressional representation at the national level. We elect our own governor, we elect our own local and state mayors, city council, those kinds of positions. And so really the only elected offices that we control are those that are on the island. And so recently what happened was, obviously everyone pretty much knows that hurricanes Irma and Maria came to Puerto Rico about 18 months ago, and they devastated the island. That was the most traumatic experience for any Puerto Rican alive. For us as a people, it has been the most traumatic experience for us in our memory. And whether you lived on the island or lived on the mainland, it was a terribly traumatic experience. Very recently, for many, many years, it's been clearly understood in Puerto Rico that something wasn't right in terms of the politicians and how the money was flowing. But more recently, the governor who is sitting in the office and who was sitting in the office during the hurricane was exposed to have been making very, very inappropriate comments with about 11 of his cronies. And he was talking about, he was giving homophobic messages, talking very violently about women. But I believe that the straw that broke the camel's back was when he thought it was appropriate to make fun of hurricane survivors and laugh about the people who passed away as part of the hurricane. I believe that was, in English, we would say it's the straw that broke the camel's back. There's a saying in Spanish that's basically, this was the last drop of water in the cup.
Yeah.
And the young people coming out of the University of Puerto Rico, there's been a whole, just like in Mississippi, there's been layers of work. There's been teachers' strikes. 298 schools were closed because austerity measures were put into place. So Puerto Rico gets into some financial trouble. They do payday, they take out some payday loans, quote unquote, with the loan sharks in Wall Street. So the local government and the Congress prioritizes repaying Wall Street instead of and they used cutting grandma's pension or teacher's pension or police pension in order to pay it. So people have experienced austerity. 290 something schools have closed. University of Puerto Rico students, there was a strike for 3 months. Teachers, there's been waves and waves of displeasure. And so over the last few weeks, there's been consistent protests to say, we're used to being disrespected by the United States, but you as our local governor, we put you in there and we can take you out. And that's what they did.
Great. And there's been some extraordinary organizing, going on, and we're glad the governor resigned. He came to his senses, but that was all because of the extraordinary organizing that took place, multi-generational organizing that took place, and we're going to hear a little bit about, how that has taken place. Incidentally, one of the organizations that I connect with very intentionally and passionately is an organization called the International Society of Black Latinos, and certainly, we are all part of the solidarity movement here in Los Angeles, on behalf of Puerto Rico and our sisters and brothers in the Caribbean, including Haiti, and other countries, and we were together at an event, and one of the leaders in that, organization, Priscilla Valdejuli, introduced me to her mom, and she said as she and her mom was talking about what was going on, her mom was reflecting on how she knew the family of the former governor, and in fact she was talking about how she used to cradle him and care for him, and she said, I gotta get to Puerto Rico just to talk to him so I can just let him know what needs to go down. And we were like, whoa, that's not the same guy, Mama. That ain't the same baby that you were rocking, way back when. But certainly, the solidarity movement here is alive and well. Again, multi-generational. We're grateful for leaders such as Mia Maldonado and others. Hollywood has come out on behalf of, Puerto Rico, and we've done several events here, around the theme compassion, for the Caribbean, and that certainly continues, as we continue to look at ways to work for a just and people-centered transition in Puerto Rico. I know you were there for several days not too long ago. Would you just give us a sense of the resistance, the organizing, the mobilizing going on there? And let me phrase it to you, in this way. While you were there, talk a little bit about what brought you pain, and what brought you hope while you were there in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think when you talk about just and people-centered, this is actually for me, and I speak for myself only, that this is one of those moments where I think I've been the proudest in my life to be Puerto Rican, to watch what's happening and to see the little island of Puerto Rico teaching a lesson in democracy to the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And, we've been involved more in terms of organizing on the mainland and organizing families who came, were displaced from Hurricane Maria and were living in hotels. And this is the first time I had been back to Puerto Rico since the hurricane. And, there's a lot of groups that are working on the ground. I asked, July 22nd was the largest public protest in the history of Puerto Rico as a nation. In Vieques in the early 90s, there were public actions, manifestaciones, protests, and the protests that have happened in July 22nd and leading up to that day of national strike were the largest that have ever happened on the island. And when I asked youth leaders and student leaders and clergy, and I'd ask, what made you just drop everything that day and go march in the streets? And it was very fascinating. It was this moment of organic outrage. It was the public processing of pain, and it was the people in some ways moving quicker than the organizations. Mm-hmm. And it was done through social media. After the hurricane, everyone was connected via Facebook or social media in some way or another. And so these hashtags spread, and our young people, thank God, they're leading in such a way that is different than how we might do it. And my purpose for traveling to Puerto Rico was to listen and learn. How can we listen? How can we learn? And how can we me as a person and we as a national organization support the leadership that's already there?
Yes.
I would say what gave me pain. It was very hard to look out the window of the airplane and see the devastation. It was shocking to me since I haven't been back. I've been to, I've lived during the summers there in the past as a kid growing up, visited the island many, many times, and I have family all over the island. So just seeing and over time, over the last period of months, hearing people's stories, hearing what it was like for my cousin Kayla to have to figure out how to get a 4-month-old, she was nursing, but how do you get a 4-month-old to go to sleep when there's no air conditioning and you live in houses that are designed for air conditioning? When I was talking to a young person named Atavex, who's used to having a cell phone and an iPad and Skype and all these things that we have, air conditioning, car, going down to the river and washing her clothes with her neighbors. Those were the kinds of stories that I heard that I had been hearing over the period of months, but it's just horrifying to believe that we allowed this. And for a year, there are still people who have no power. There are still people. What gave me hope? A couple of days after the the big events and the rallies, and you had all these people hand-wringing about, oh, this is going to be, vandalism, and this is going to, stop the tourist cruise boats from bringing. And I spoke with a young woman named Cristina, and she said, vandalism can be fixed, but corruption can't. Mm-hmm. And the people called for, okay, now everybody, let's come back to San Juan, let's paint the walls, let's clean up the mess, and everybody come into San Juan and spend your money. And I was there on that Sunday, and that place was packed, and every restaurant was packed. And so it's really interesting to see it's a leader-full experience where there's many leaders. You had one day there was a group of young people leading a perreo protest in front of the Capitol, and then another day you had a salsa protest that felt like a party in front of the Fortaleza, which is the governor's mansion. And, it's just sort of wave upon wave. And that is how change happens when the people take to the streets. The people say, there's more, and there's more of us than you, and we're not afraid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And certainly, watching that protest was just so powerful, and the solidarity protests around the United States. We had several here, in Los Angeles, just to walk with folk, even though we are, on the other side of the country, and to support that some powerful, collaborative work that we see happening.
There was a couple. One little thing I'd like to add here is that I spoke with two different people, two different perspectives. A young person who was actually at the march on the 22nd, and on social media, she was able to see what was happening in New York City, where they were doing a protest with everybody had their Puerto Rican flags saying, "Yo soy Boricua, pa que tú lo sepas." She said it was so inspiring for her to know that they weren't alone. And it's the same thing we've talked about, right? No one stands alone. And then I spoke with a pastor who's still, they've been feeding people, hundreds of people every day, but still have not really received any help from local, state, or national government. No, not even a case of water. And the clergy kind of looking at what had happened in San Juan saying, we ask and we ask, but look what happened in San Juan. The youth, they didn't ask, they demanded, and they got what they were asking for. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to watch.
Yeah. Before I go to the next question, so help us understand, is Puerto Rico a territory of the United States? Is it occupied by the United States? Can you kind of just help with
Sure.
with how to describe, this relationship, which in so many ways is not necessarily symbiotic. It can be very, very exploitive. So can you just say a little bit about, just what that is?
It's essentially a territory. Depending on your political orientation, you might call it a colony. It's called Estado Libre Asociado, which means a liberated and associated state. Mm-hmm. It's a very fancy way of saying Congress is in charge.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ambiguity around that. I think that's critical because that informs the multi-layered, resistance that's going on. And then I invite you to talk a little bit about that, because as we're dealing with the corruption, which in so many ways has impacted the educational system, it seems like it the most. Hence, all of these students, feeling the effects of that. But then, a lot of folk are also, that's why I talk about people-centered. There's just a movement of saying, we're going to do what we got to do in terms of leveraging the assets that we have. So a lot of people, are engaged in a lot of creative and innovative initiatives that has to do with with agriculture, that has to do with how to rethink about utilizing, the land, utilizing the sun, utilizing the the ocean, if you will. I mean, I have a friend and brother, Valentino, in Guayama, working on a particular project such as that. And I know you were able to connect with some folk while you were there around some of those, just grassroots driven, people centered, initiatives. So can you just tell us a little bit about just a multi-layered, resistance and struggle, that's going on that continue to push Puerto Rico, towards a territory, a place, of freedom and liberation given in each particular location.
Yes. Well, you started the program with the quote of "Be the change that you want to see in the world," and the experience of Hurricane Maria made very, very clear that help is not coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Help was not coming. Help didn't come. And so what happens when help doesn't come? Women and men, they lean in and they okay, now there's all kinds of work across the island about how do we draw the energy from the sun? How do we make sure our food is produced close enough to us so we can get at it if we need to? How do we make sure that storage is happening of food in case of a tsunami or an earthquake or another hurricane? And it's ingenious. It's, how do we harness the power of the wind? We have all kinds of natural rainfall in Puerto Rico. We shouldn't be having to pay for bottled water from Nestle.
Mm-hmm.
And so all across, whether it was in Caguas, whether it was in Loíza, in San Germán, Ponce, Mayagüez, the San Juan area, everybody is thinking about resiliency, readiness, and self-sufficiency. We grow coconuts in Puerto Rico. They import it out around the world. We have eggs from, chickens that are being sent to the U.S. and then we pay. So there's just a really kind of messed up political reality. And I would remind you how it was when we were together in San Francisco that really you talked about the Fillmore District becoming the Western Addition. My theory and the theory of many people in Puerto Rico is that Puerto Rico is being gentrified. And all that you see in our communities across the country is happening there. Right before the governor left, he made sure he passed laws that the entire island is being rezoned. And one of the neighborhoods called Loíza that is below the flood level, right below sea level, much like we think about New Orleans. And it's predominantly the place where slaves who were released from or released themselves from slavery moved to Loíza and they settled there. That entire area is not eligible for any of the opportunity zone resources that will be coming to Puerto Rico. So there's all kinds of fights. People in the communities, they understand what's happening. They see it. And because of our political reality, we can't, as people who live here on the mainland, we can't get Congress to do anything right now. Imagine Puerto Rico trying to get Congress to vote to eliminate the debt, to get rid of the Jones Act, to allow Puerto Rico to have congressional representation. There's 3.5 million people in Puerto Rico. That's a number of House seats and 2 senators that will be brought into the equation. So this is a long-term fight. What we saw in July of 2019 is a moment we will all never forget as a country, as a people. And the other thing I would say is, I said it earlier, but the unity that exists now between the people who live on the island and the diaspora is like I've not seen before. You mentioned Priscilla Valdejuli. I actually know someone who's part of that family. It's not a big place. You kind of get to know folks, but the connection that I felt when I went to Puerto Rico this time was different than I have in the past. There is some of the borders that have existed between island and mainland are gone. They're really, it's a moment for unity, and we need to capitalize on that. It's hopeful, exciting, and honestly, it's a little bit like, this is going to be a long fight, so we better get ready, and we better make sure that we're following the lead of the incredible visionary, strategic, badass women and men and youth who are schooling us in how this can be done. And then we come alongside them or behind them to give them support, but that we don't come in, and no one comes in saying, here, this is what we know, let me show you, because that's not going to work.
We want to say bold and badass. How about that? Bold and badass. And you're right about the importance of indigenous leadership in terms of how do we follow the lead, of the leadership there. It is so on the one hand it is sobering, but also on the other hand very disturbing, when we connect these dots, around how gentrification is taking place, in Puerto Rico. I mean, here in Los Angeles, we're dealing, with that. We dealt with it in San Francisco. It happened in New York. It's just happening everywhere. I mean, this whole piece about place and positionality, and then the displacement of people. Folk need to understand it is an integral part of the DNA of this yet to be United States, of America. Displacement, was an integral part of the beginning of this country, what it was, the displacement of Native Americans by way of the Trail of Tears and other, strategies, the displacement of Africans, from the continent, to come and provide, a labor here. This year is the 400th, anniversary, remembrance, commemoration, whatever you want to call it, of the enslavement, of Africans. That continues, in terms of what's happening, with so many neighborhoods, whether it's the Fillmore becoming the Western Addition, South Central LA becoming South LA. It happened in Oakland, where I was when I lived in Harlem. It happened there. So I don't know whether I'm following gentrification or whether gentrification is following me. But one thing is clear. It's a reality for so many children, young people, men, women, families, and communities in terms of that. So you just mentioning what's going on around Puerto Rico as an island being gentrified. I mean, that's bold. That's messed up. That is basically a continuation of systems and schemes of displacement that has taken place and continue to take place, in the United States and wherever, those exploitive and destructive tentacles, reach, around the world, especially, in countries of color. So let's talk a little bit about the faith community, because that's kind of our part of our port of entry, in this, as we transition to talk a little bit about solutions, steps, how can we be in solidarity with our sisters and brothers, there. I know the two of us will be on a call this coming week, to talk about, some strategic pieces, and hopefully at some point, we'll get over there. I can't wait to get to Guayamo to check in with my brother Valentino, and to get to Luisa. I've heard a lot about Luisa, so I'm looking forward to just getting there and just being with our folk around that. So in terms of steps, solutions, your thoughts on that, and especially around the faith community that's there.
It was fascinating to be down there and to meet with so many clergy members. I met with clergy members from a range of denominations, and there was a lot of similar recommendations, suggestions for what needs to happen next at the church level, at the regional level, at the island-wide level. There is a council of churches that has been active, was very active in Vieques, and then was active in this effort and continue to be. what I loved about my visit to Puerto Rico is I drove from San Juan down to San Germán, and I go meet with, there was about, I don't know, 50 or 100 people at a community event, and there was pastors from 6 or 7 different parts of the island. And they were being convened by the Black Church of God in Christ. So here I am in the middle of Puerto Rico, and for some of those clergy, the first help that they had received was from Church of God in Christ.
All right.
People, copy machines, money, food. So I'm sitting in this space with black and brown, male and female clergy leaders, thinking, see, this is what God has for us.
Right.
This is what God is doing. And, then spoke with a pastor who oversees an entire denomination. They have about 70 churches in the island, 300 acres of land on the most fertile land in the island. And they're trying to figure out, how do we get our churches off of the electrical grid? Because that electrical grid is owned by some of the people who are trying to snuff us out. And so to hear the clergy being willing to kind of learn from the young people, being willing to use their houses of worship. One pastor says, we changed our worship time. We had worship at 3, and then the feeding was at 4, and then people, really emphasizing that the church has to change to accommodate the world we live in now, not the world we lived in yesterday. And I got to see some clergy really adapting their ministry to change. Now, if you're a pastor and you've been feeding people in your community, 250 people a day for the last years or more, what do you think your opportunity is for ministry as compared to that pastor or religious leader, imam, rabbi, who, stayed inside the walls of their church during people's time of need? I think it will awaken, enrich, and enliven the ministry, and I'm hopeful for collaboration. There is not as much across-island collaboration as I think people would like to have, and some of it is just about geography and terrain, but there's lots of hope and wish for the faith community to be, faith in action, and they're doing it. Many of them are doing it with very little support from the state. And so I was encouraged to see people, I heard different stories about different faith responses, but one pastor I talked to has a church of 27 people. No one in his church has a job because their job is to sell mangoes and water and platanutres and polvorones on the side of the road, in between the cars. And so they're trying to figure out, how do we grow this ministry? But they're talking to the people who are the most directly impacted, and that's who that pastor's church is. And okay, so those are the people who need to be leading our answers to the problems, because they understand them very, very clearly.
Yes. And just, again, the creativity, around the intentionality to put one's faith in action. 27, 270, or 2,700 members, every, congregation can do something to lean in, to see how we can facilitate, freedom and liberation for folks. We certainly will check in, with our denominational connections there, including Kojic, because, here in Los Angeles, certainly the leader of the Church of God in Christ, Archbishop Charles E. Blake, who is right here in Los Angeles. In fact, we are, down the street, from the church. So we certainly will try and see how we can make those connections as we look for long-term sustainable solidarity and support with our folk there. Can you, as we make our way to conclusion, maybe talk a little bit about what's next? Any next steps that you would want to share with us around what Faith in Action will be looking at doing. I know we are talking with several other partners, locally, and regionally around how to support our folks. Any thoughts on next steps coming from Faith in Action?
Yeah, I think, we want to be really careful to not be one of those national groups who just parachutes in. So we're really listening to the needs that have been presented to us. So far, we've been presented with needs that they seem quite modest. One community leader needs 12 to 15 laptops. And I said, well, what kind? You want Mac or HP? And her son said, one that works. So 12 to 15 computers, ice machines, things like that. They're pretty simple. Then there's also political. We're going to need to help people create more political power to change things. And so we need to figure out what role the clergy and the grassroots leaders and community development organizations would like for Faith in Action to play. Stay tuned as they need resources. They need financial resources on the island. And so I'm sure we'll be calling for people to consider making contributions and just figure out the right way to move the resources so they go straight to the community leaders who need it the most. And I think we're just in a learning mode. This is a moment in our country of a lot of chaos. And when you have chaos, you don't know the connection between cause and effect. So you try and you try and you try. But what we do see happening is we're connecting dots between what's happening in Michigan. Detroit, Michigan had a unelected body that was making decisions for people on the ground. That's what we have in Puerto Rico, an unelected junta that's making decisions for people who are voters. We need to really look at how these dots all connect across our country, and really actually you're working in South Africa and other places around our world. And so I don't know yet, where we will end up, but I do know that we're connecting dots, and our approach is to be an organization that shows that it's possible for people for Black and brown communities to come together, for people to center the leadership of women of color, to focus on the indigenous leadership, put our faith into action, and make sure people understand that no one stands alone. That's our approach, is to say this is a moment where we could look the way we think God intended us to look. Mm-hmm. And that's all of us together pulling in the same direction, sort of showing his glory through our relationship with one another.
Awesome. Denise, thank you so much. Certainly, this is very, very exciting. You're right. This is a moment in time for us. We want to try and see how we can turn it into a movement. And our folk in Puerto Rico need to know that there are people all around, this country who would want to be in solidarity with them, because, as we seek to resolve what's happening there, it helps us to connect the dots to resolve what's happening where we are. I know, my colleague in the Atlantic Fellowship for Racial Equity, Brother Gito, who is in Chicago, they are working, on a solidarity, event and movement in Chicago, on behalf of our folk, in Puerto Rico. So our folk need to know that they are not alone. We're in this together. We are all inextricably linked into a garment of mutuality, as Dr. King, puts it. And so, I grew up with the saying, of Ubuntu. I am because you are, and because you are, therefore I am. Dr. King connected Ubuntu when he writes from the Birmingham jail by saying that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So this deep sense of solidarity and mutuality, helps us understand that we need to continue to work for a world where everyone belongs, and that's what it's all about. And our belonging is based on our humanity and our dignity. Our belonging is not based on a disposition, of feeling that we are intruding, feeling that we are dealing with the imposter syndrome, if you will, in terms of that. But, that's the whole piece, around that. We all belong because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. This has been Faith Without Borders. We've had an an awesome, empowering time with my sister, friend, and colleague and leader, Denise Collazo. She joined us via Skype from Clearwater, Florida. And our topic today, of course, was Puerto Rico. How would a just and people-centered, a transformation look like? We hope this has been informative to you, inspirational to you. We hope that the information that we provided for you would enable you to see how you can mobilize and organize, where you are, who you are with, as we seek to engage in the liberatory work that we are called, to be a part of, here in Los Angeles, around the country, and indeed around the world. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you back here on August the 25th, 3 p.m., live from Los Angeles, where we're going to be talking about blacks on the border and lean in on not just on that conversation, but on strategies to facilitate transformation for our immigrant sisters and brothers. Thank you so much. I'm Reverend Kelvin Sauls, and this has been Faith Without Borders.